thank you everyone who made it into this virtual space with or without the password. So apologies for that. But we are very happy to introduce Christina Jauernik tonight. She will run a session entitled Clitch, Glitch, and glissade. And we'll hear more about errors, physical weight shifts, or other definitions, metaphorical. So I'm very excited to hear more about it. And just to give you a brief idea of the session, Christina will share her artistic research practice with us first, then there will be some physical exercises, and then we'll have an open conversation afterwards. And to very briefly introduce Christina Jauernik, of course, this is not going to do any justice to her work, but just a couple of keywords. She studied contemporary dance at the Hogeschool voor den Kunsten in Amsterdam, choreography and visual arts practices at the Darton College of Arts in the UK, and art and architecture at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna and in Berlin. And she's currently a senior scientist at the Institute for Art and Architecture at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. And she has collaborated with Wolfgang Chapeller since 2012. And the collaboration has consisted of several public presentations. For example, a catalog Hands Have No Tears to Flow of the Austrian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. And the current project that she is completing is her PhD, which is an artistic research project. It's entitled Intraspace at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and her book that she has co-edited with Wolfgang Chapeller. It's a peer-reviewed publication entitled Intra Towards an Intraspace, was published a couple of weeks ago at Steinberg Press and part of the publication series of the Academy of Fine Arts. And if you want to know more about her practice, I would strongly recommend looking more into all the little things that she has done. And yeah, very happy to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to you both, Lily and Lisa, for this very kind invitation to a very fascinating series, I have to say. And I'm very pleased that I have been given the opportunity to contribute to this constellation of speakers and perspectives. And I look very much forward also to the conversation afterwards. I will now share my screen. I hope this works. No, sorry, go. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, works perfect.
Okay, super. I actually thought I turned the order around. So I would like to invite you first to follow with me a short series of exercises, which are actually small proposals to tune into the work that I will then later introduce and share with you. That is a practice with virtual figures. And these are in a way small suggestions to also look at what we have available at the moment, which is our own bodies. And we will use them as a starting point for this practice, a practice that is for everybody, that doesn't require any particular knowledge, but that really everyone can join in. And I would talk you through these exercises. And so you're more than welcome to actually, if you have the space, move and take out as much space as possible or available to you, travel through space, but also, of course, you can just follow these exercises sitting, standing up, lying down, and you can just work, so to say, with your imagination, so you don't have to move, to just take it from where your body and your space is today. And I also a small brief treat for our Zoom tired eyes and brains. So if there are no immediate questions, I would begin. Gently let your eyelids close. With closed eyes, sense how the tiny strip-like surfaces touch, where upper and lower lid rest upon each other. Locate the two eyeballs resting in their sockets, heavy, balancing in their surrounding fluid. Visualize the inner curvature of the eyelids, actually where the eye might be looking at with closed eyes, this protective resting space. Shift your awareness to your breathing and notice how other contours of your inner body shape and volume are pushed in and out. And make your attention travel to those zones where the breath is expanding and contracting your inner body volume. Keep breathing in and out. And then breathe in another time. Hold your breath, swallow, and exhale. And we do that again. We inhale, hold the breath, and then in this suspended moment, swallow and sense how your saliva drops down the esophagus, and exhale. One more time. Inhale, hold your breath, swallow, exhale. Now we kind of follow that stream of gravity and bring our attention to our feet. Imagining the tiny bones of your toes, their joint structure, and their possible movement range. And you would just envision them first without moving in stillness. And then you start to move the little toes and, so to say, test their abilities, their structural abilities to bend and rotate maybe. Then you continue to your ankle joints. You do the same. So with your inner eye, you first picture the possibilities of rotation in the ankles, the degrees of freedom of motion, and then you actually start moving them. And then you continue to your knee joints. And you picture the planes of rotation and the directions of bending. Them. And on to your hands. Envision their possibilities. And then you start moving. You continue to your thrust, their complex motion. Envision it move. And so you keep going to your shoulders. You image how they are hanging from the clavicula, how they are actually fixed at a very tiny point. And then you test their abilities to move three-dimensionally. You move to your elbows. You do the same to your wrists, hands, finger joints. And then as a last one, you travel to your head and you let it rest on the top of the spine. You think about its possibility to move, and then you start testing its mobility. So this is basically a warm-up to remember our own structural conditions, because that very much matters in relation to working then with a virtual figure whose skeleton is in a kind of different structural and functional condition. And then I would like to talk you through one more exercise that also refers to a perspective that I would later try to explain you within the project's condition, and that refers to the idea of distributed eyes. So now that we have, so to say, traveled through our body and looked at the different body parts and the relation to each other, I would invite you to imagine looking inward again and thinking of a camera that is placed in a body part, for example, the elbow, and let the camera face inside into your body. So imagine your body interior as empty, the skin forming a shell like a cast, and the interior of the entire body, the negative, can be seen. It is visible to you. So all organs, all muscles, fat, flesh is removed. It's an enormous inner cathedral space, cavity space. And so you take this inner point of view and you direct it to a distant point. So, for example, if it's the elbow that you chose, you position that inner eye and start to move it around. How far can you see from your elbow? If you make small adjustments in your body alignment and placement, can you maybe catch a glimpse of your inner hip or even your heel? What do these eyes see? What is this interior landscape like? So it is it's an exercise to begin to move, to explore this interior vision. And actually those are very small, concentrated movements, because already a small adjustment makes you, provides you with a complete different view. So it is actually a quite complicated inner surface and space. And also, if you want to do this at some point together, like in pairs, there is also an option for one person to guide the other person's eye camera, so to say. And I have, so to say, finished with the exercises. I hope you all were able to follow me. And I would now go on to the introduction of my artistic work. So, idle. The conditions have changed since last night. The brightness of the morning sun, diffusely entering through the two windows at the side, projects a light gradient across the space. Yes. Light beams are redirected and cut through an environment of flat, thin, stretched tissues of different porosity, of mirroring micro-thin aluminum foils, light diffusing dark gray plastic, heavy black anti-skid plastic, of computer monitors and liquid crystals displays backlit, of gently curved surfaces of tiny lenses, some with zooming capacities, distributed on the perimeter of this environment. A few of these lenses hover close to the floor, most of them around an estimated horizon or median height. Several are perched higher up, taking a bird's eye view. This environment is furnished with 12 such tiny lenses, all directed towards an imaginary center point, as if this multi-eyed being were squinting at itself. These are inward-facing eyes, staring into one imaginative center, the approximate middle spot of a black PVC dense surface. The cameras are mounted on magic arms with 2 ball joints, granting them all degrees of freedom. Their focus is set mechanically through the manual turn of a delicate wheel around each lens. These adjustments of directionality and sharpening are made with the help of a back focus chart, or Simon's star, as the proportions of the human index finger and thumb are in conflict with the revolving fineness of the optics. The Simon's star was then removed. The lenses are wide-angled. The sharpness of the image drops drastically from the focus point in the center to the edges, or what is called spherical aberration in optical systems, including the human eye. The human eye operates in a quite similar manner. At the fovea, located at the center of the retina, a high-resolution image is received, while the remaining eye sees a poor image. The fovea, crucial for reading and other activities that require concentration and focus, is a tiny area covering less than 1% of the retina, but over 50% of the visual cortex in the brain. Our impression of seeing everything before us with equal sharpness is solely accomplished through our eyes moving back and forth, scanning the scene about 3 times per second, followed by compensation work of the brain. Even to focus on an object requires the letting go of the background information around it. In order to see means a latency in the refreshment of the remaining information. Therefore, what we see is highly fictional. The truth of the eye is a speculative, collaborative effort between the sensory organ of the eye, the visual cortex of the brain, and the nervous system. Paradoxically, the anatomy of the human eye is built so that one sees nothing right at the point where vision happens. At this blind spot of the eye, no color and light information can be processed. In a small depression at the back of the eye sits this optic disc, the field in the retina where the optic nerve passes through. This entrance to the eyeball is without rods or cones, unable to detect light on the disc, thus creating a blind spot in the eye. And again, it is the brain and the correspondence between 2 eyes compensating for the missing information and completing the picture, so to say. It is interesting that in octopus eyes, the retina is undisturbed throughout. The nerve fibers reach the retina from behind and light touches the entire inner curve of the eye. So this many-eyed octopus sees without blind spots, arrays of continuous images, while vision for the 12-eyed system of cameras in our environment, converging of 12 foci. They each see in color, but their main source of perception is contrasts of darkness and light. The single fields of vision are channeled and superimposed to create a 3-dimensional shared view, produced by a common visual cortex where all of the dispersed information is gathered into a coherent model. That is a spatial composite model generated by forking viewing angles, colliding in the blurring peripheries of the image. The decline of precision towards edges in each of the views is visible in the decrease of brightness and sharpness, and further amplified by the vignetting apparent in wide-angle lenses, causing the corners of the image to darken. The 12 individual frames are linked through a process of intrinsic and extrinsic calibration, which sets the view. The becoming of the staring, the engineered vision. Intrinsic calibration registers the orientation of the individual camera's direction, the field of view of each device, from the dense high-resolution center to the declining coverage in the vignetting corners. Extrinsic calibration detects the shared views among the 12 cameras. The more field of views meet, the more accurately visible the point of space is, or refined is its representation in the model. Therefore, the visual abilities of this 12-eyed system is very much dependent on the overlapping and crisscrossing of views, of the 12 squinting across the same axis where their focus sharpens. This functions solely under the premise that none of the fields of view are moved the slightest millimeter. So each position here is very fixed. The common staring is the prerequisite of clear sight. The model consists of these intersecting image planes, which deliver spatial seeing from 12 directions, informed by 12 eyes, each with their focal accuracy that blurs towards the edges. It is a three-dimensional composition with 12 points of focus that are sharpened and in high resolution, and of the spaces in between that are zones of ambiguous noise. And this is where spectra of different communication appear and the potentiality of the diaphanous is constructed. These indeterminate boundaries that occur along these intersecting frames of camera views also accommodate another vision, one of disseminated fields of view that only temporarily enter into a seemingly corresponding perspective, engendered by a shimmering and blurring through each other. The preceding calibration inducing these fields is accomplished manually through a series of given steps, beginning with a checkerboard held close to each lens, gently tilting and moving back and forth in close proximity to the optical device. Then, followed by a walking choreography drawing diagonals between the camera and between the cameras and circles, spiraling outwards from the center of the space. While carrying another checkerboard with less than the used one in front of the lenses, this time changing its position while moving within the camera sight. Once the number of intersections is sufficient, the calibration is concluded and the 12 eyes are now destined to stare. The 12 eyes build a chamber of eyes, an inverted compound perspective, so to say, which are sent by Ethernet cables to the computer, which processes then these 12 individual views into a three-dimensional aggregate. So without memory or archival function, this only delivers color image data to a central processing engine. And here is then where visual information is read against its past. A past that is defined as a spatial condition of an instant of the three-dimensional aggregate. Since the system mainly reads contrasts in the delivered image data, the referred condition is based on stark differences in lighting. The processing engine holds a short-term and rather fragile memory of this previously captured representation of the gazed-at environment. The stream of signals from the 12 eyes is then interpreted against its own visual spatial history. The relationship between the memorized constructed three-dimensional image and the continuously incoming data of real-time images is based on their dissonance. This mismatch is also a site of intra, of the diaphanous, that is constantly reconfigured by and in relation to the environment, this 12-eyed arena. The incoherence opens a space of chatter, of disturbances, and of efforts to translate these, finding a way back to a commonly stillness in all its environments in order to see precisely. So all tissues, foils, plastics, displays should be motionless, and even the lighting is ideally as diffuse and constant as possible to have the least amount of interference and to protect the system from its own fragility. The phenomenon of the diaphanous can be thought of as a theory of invisibility. The Greek prefix dia, meaning through, situates the visual in relation with a mediating space that is a perceptual space between I and what is looked at. Aristotle, in his theory on perception on the soul, refers to this spatial relationship between sense organ and sensed object. He introduces the concept of trans-appearance, which manifests a distance that is required for something to appear. That distance inherently sets a relationship between the mediated parts. And it is only through this space that experience is made possible. His concept associates the diaphanous with something plastic, flexible, and in motion. Central to the characteristics of the diaphanous, Aristotle explains, is its possibility to alter between two different states, the potential and the actual. In its potential state, it is completely transparent, see-through. During the actual state, the diaphanous appropriates properties of the object and with it approaches the eye, thereby charging the in-between space. Thus, the diaphanous not only shows an ability to transpose, but quite literally comes close to the eyes. To allow for this transformative translational act to take place, the diaphanous is considered indeterminate. Due to its material features, it is able to take on a specific form when necessary. Space becomes the carrier for translating. The initially suggested theory of invisibility defines perceptual space as a prerequisite for the diaphanous to actualize itself in the foreground. One could expect when stepping out of the potential state and leaving transparency to enter the actual state of communicating between eye and object, that the diaphanous also turns visible. But this is not the case. The operative space remains imperceptible and therefore also invisible. Aristotle even attests it as background, being out of sight. Interestingly, what is titled background by the motion tracking software that we have been using for our project is comparable to the potential state of the diaphanous as described by Aristotle. The cameras see through what has been captured as fixed space, space becoming transparent for their lenses. Alterations of this registered image of the space initiate a loosening at the edges of whatever is changing in the image. These indeterminate perimeters activate a translational process, finding signatures of the previous while keeping or re-establishing a connection to the present moment. These gaps in the image are mediating spaces, facilitating the appearance of something, the experience of seeing through different lenses and bodies, dissolving categories of exterior and interior. In the enclosed space of the Intraspace project that I'm referring here to and reporting from, the focus dwelled on the study of shared human and engineered virtual movement. Registered by a network of 12 cameras installed as part of this motion tracking system, the body volumes and their approximate postures were extracted from the camera images. This method, commonly known as articulated body pose estimation, is a dedicated field of research in computer vision and investigates the application of algorithms for the tracking of articulated movement, solely relying on image data. And this complex system still continues actually to be challenging for the discipline in its aims to further minimize latency while increasing the performance stability, the number of bodies, and the complexity of the surrounding environment, as well as the coverage size or dimension of the trackable area. Applications reach beyond their use in optical motion capture to also physiotherapy, human image synthesis, robot control, or visual surveillance technology. While a majority of solutions implement previous image training data, the approach we have used and collaborated on together with a team of the Max Planck Institute in Saarbrücken together with Niels Hasler and his team, directly models the similarity between the model and the unsegmented image data. The present system's body consists of a skeleton with 58 joints, manually modeled as a default human model, a model of 63 spheres positioned along the bones, and a specific model with a color assigned to each of those spheres. The bones define how the skeleton is able to move, while the spheres wrench and transform the skeleton to fit the bodily proportions. So this is referring to the initial exercise because the skeleton that we have worked with has a very limited amount of bones and joints, whereas our own body with there is a certain So in the previous image, you saw actually our working space, how we set up our motion tracking system. The first plan that I showed was a top view, a bird's eye view, so to say, with all technical and human and engineered components, part of this framework. And that little elevation showed the technical components as well, and us working. So there were two people lying on the floor, two bodies lying on the floor. There is a screen, a large screen. Okay, now people want me to let them in. I press enter. Oh no.
Yes, that's it. Thank you.
It worked?
Yes, it did. Yep.
Okay, good. It also meant me jumping into slides. Okay, never mind. So here you actually see now what I've been describing. There are the tiny cameras of the motion tracking system at the side. And there is a large back projection with the virtual figures that are linked with my body or the body of Esther, who I've been collaborating a lot, dancer as well. And that was, so to say, the spatial constellation that allowed us to meet and work together. So there is Christian to decide who watches actually the stream of images from the 12 cameras on one of the computer monitors. And he also is in view of most of the 12 cameras. So he sits in the stillness of the system, and his movements with the mouse, the changing light reflections on his shoulders when he turns his head away from the monitor, unsettle the constructed spatial memory. He sometimes also adjusts camera parameters manually, actually compensating for unexpected changes in the environment. And there is me lying on the floor, sometimes together also with Esther at the center of the space. And so it is a composite image that is based actually on the absence of bodies, constructing a third and fourth body to be embodied. So the 12 images are creating a virtual body skeleton volume that then Esther or my body. There is another person wanting to enter. Okay.
So just to say, I can do that on my side, so you can just focus on your.
Okay, great. I'm grateful for that. Thank you. Okay. So through these 12 cameras, with actually a rather poor resolution and distorted views towards the edges, as we have seen initially, the system does not actually see bodies as we perceive them moving in the environment. They are seen as fields of color, a medium composed of neighboring similar colors, which forms a new colored sea associated with parts of a moving limb. This selective view lets the background fall behind and transcends blindness to a new kind of sight, a sight that is not a view of something, unlike a human gaze. Introverted gaze, occupied with the fluttering of bodies, where their presence is based in gaze, maybe, diaphanous with the previous and the now. A misreading caused by the vague, comparatively diminished visual capacity facilitates a time gap in the meeting of bodies. Errors operate like potentials, opening possibilities. Optical and physical heterogeneities are registered as disturbances by the system. In the top right corner of the motion tracking screen sits a bar indicating the milliseconds of deviation, a live number highlighted in green, turning red when latency increases beyond the respected value. A delay changes the image and the relation with it, a visualization of time, indirectly appearing on and between bodies. A moment of the diaphanous is the uncovering, the displaying, a modality of perception and of becoming otherwise. A differentiated, even expanding seeing is allowed for by a streak in the eye, a strata of slime, noise in the system. The streak is movable, temporary, touches the transparent skin of the eye, the tunica externa bulbi, moisturized with lacrimal fluid through which the image is distorted. Like seeing through a veil, what lies behind is visible, yet seems imprinted on another body, sharing a different materiality. The liaison of cameras and projections, light entering and exiting the lenses of the many-eyed apparatus is constructed to retrieve visual information, to see and cast the scene with the least possible temporal void across the spheres. Yet the projected remains indeterminate, carried across the space and bodies of foil, plastic, and flesh, each material swallowing some parts and contributing others. The unsettled state, the eluding nature, and the interruptions in this system of seeing introduce an aspect of error, apparent as sudden disconnection between physical and virtual worlds. Such errors caused by bad sight could be regarded as a loss of information and detail, a reduction in the process of overwriting. Certainly, the system, in trying to overcome the error, aims to re-establish the initial state. But there is a pivotal moment in this erroring. The embodiment of the other, the appearance of what seems foreign, and the reading from the technical perspective through the algorithm's sense of sight. Following the origin of the Latin term errare, meaning to wander, error manifests the inherent potential of moving in order to think. Errors are not stasis, but a searching movement. The immediate transfer of the error into the body for the human as an impulse, for the virtual as a departure, demonstrates its shared mutual capacity. A glitch in the system manifests itself as movement, even if the figures are locked because the stream of data collapsed or froze. This moment of seemingly sheer nothingness is filled with enduring dithering. Unexpected tossing of legs or arms make the embodied experience physically challenging. Translating the errors into the body as they become visible on the screens is rereading the error as potentiality, an experimental force that keeps shifting. The glitch as a random moment of error in the computational system brings itself into view. It opens the encrypted to peek inside. The rather recent term Clitch was coined in the 1940s as technical jargon for brief bursts of unexpected behavior in electrical circuits, and can be traced back to the German word glitschen, glitschig. denoting a slippery surface and the corresponding movement of sliding along. It also refers to a dance movement, a connecting step, originally actually a ballet term. A glissade is a very open, exposing, springy move with the entire body and focus outwards. One foot slides to the side and the weight is transferred from one leg to the other with a slight air phase, not exactly a jump, but a suspension pushing off the floor for a moment. The electronic glitch does not cut off body from technology. On the contrary, it allows for the mutual gliding in between the systems and hierarchies, taking on a different speed and momentum, that of the machinic. Acknowledging the life of the technical apparatus postulates another legibility, another form of attention towards the unknown and its unexpected behavior. Embracing the contingent turns of perspective offered by the occurrence of glitches and the disruption in the steadiness of the 50 frames per second stream of self involves the machinic taking the lead. Together with the bodies, still part of the negotiation, it turns into a joint articulation based on chance operations. The act of translation from electric signals into a physicality and vice versa assumes a mutual legibility of something that is encrypted, inaccessible for each other, an algorithmic lapse and coded bodies. The era as segregating power pulls apart and joins anew. In opening this space of translation, it allows many views to dwell in between segments of the undecipherable. Returning to seeing the era. For instance, it is not straightforward that a streak in the image, commonly understood as disturbing for the human eye, because it obscures part of the image, has the same meaning for the technical eye. What is a blurred image for an algorithm, for the system? In what direction should we turn the wheel to get a sharper image? For whose eyes? For which perspective? Rather than a compromising image representation from a human's eyes point of view, the image in the eyes of the technical apparatus might be perceived as sharper, more complex and enriched. For the system, the more blurring and frayed the image is, the less information is readable, and the more the algorithm takes over, weakening the image that is no longer perceptible to the human eye. So I would now try, I hope this works, to show a brief footage. Is this visible? I'm playing a video.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Now, yes.
there is movement in era. Then the term links to meanings that are of spatial consequences, such as losing one's orientation, like in to wander or to stray, but also physical ones, like in to tumble or to dither, as if losing balance. In a biased sense, eras could imply an abyss, forcing a break that eventually leads to a dead end. Instead, a different take suggests to look at eras as transitory moments that know about prior and posterior conditions. Era as paradox, the dizziness within the era, its tiny movements of transitioning between the state before the era and the future of it, ultimately unravel a problem of translation. The era, a quandary and a question of translation. The occurrence of eras as part of the practice with virtual figures, the technical framework, underscores and yields exactly these aforementioned spatial and physical consequences. The ostensible gap or abyss, splitting between what is era and what is not, cannot withstand. There is no clear boundary, rather, a communicative milieu of erroring, of desiring to establish connections, reaching to another side. It is a site of constant transformation, and in that way, making room for negotiations. A perceptive space that positions the era and the diaphanous in a relative speculative constellation with one another. When the language between human and virtual figure transforms to the encrypted, we together enter the dimension of erring, to surrender to becoming unknown, unrecognizable, unnamed. I'm quoting here writer Legacy Russell in her manifesto Glitch Feminism, that also praises the era skirt control being difficult to replicate and therefore difficult to reproduce for the sake of troubleshooting them out of existence. Eras create the urge for describing and naming them, to isolate them in order to exert control. All such efforts are driven by a concept of eras as abyss, as interruption in a world that is steered by fluency, growth, and acceleration. Russell too attributes movement to era and argues that this inherent motion makes it hardly visible, yet its interference ever present. Interestingly, this links back to the potential state of the diaphanous, which is transparent while setting up a perceptive space for something to appear. In her view, the capacity of refusal and impossibility in accidental bodies that refrain from definition is urgently needed. To disappear with the glitch. In a surveilled and networked society, with every click, we consent to becoming accomplices in feeding algorithms, processing identification and profiling systems. Therefore, through wandering in between, Russell advocates the glitch a transformative power, a possibility for liberating bodies from data and gender oppression and consumptions. There is no unity among the bodies of the virtual, of Esther or mine, and yet similarly a kind of communicative intimacy is expressed in the fractures occurring in motion, creating apertures for a shimmering to enter the correspondences across the bodies involved. This shimmering, technical flicker or spatial distancing might at first and for a while be experienced, but it somehow an interruption in the flow, a mistake. It takes numerous encounters for the senses to adapt and accustom to this shimmering and to see through the foreign language of familiarity and likeness even. With such generosities in the eyes, aspects of the many-layered and never completely unveiled self may filter through. But it is not solely vision that habituates to this shimmering, it is the entire bodily perceptive apparatus, including the proprioceptive senses, that begin to see, to listen through this new capacity. Without ever touching or arriving at the other body, signs of one another appear and imprint across distance. Because this composite vision includes the eyes and lenses of the machinic, the technical, the algorithmic, human, and other system, a disseminated perspective without a single focal point emerges. The periphery of this vision are an integral subject of speculation. Consequently, the concept of sharpness of an image needs to be reconsidered as the point of control slips out of focus. For distributed seeing means giving away the power to focus, giving in to a negotiating vibrancy among all distance instances. Seeing unevenly sharp in a shared system of eyes might allow the different fluctuating visual abilities to filter through each other. And by participating, by being part of this shared body, one's own faculty of seeing changes. This particular vision can be regarded as diaphanous condition, a vision that allows to show, to come into appearance, its very own potentiality of seeing and making visible differently. The inclusive quality, the diversity of views, make it an agile, pliable seeing system. The person is in touch with the technical, engineered figure through its non-relation with the rest of the space. This principle continues. Being in touch is the perpetual finding of skinning each other as a process, reinterpolating the appropriate proportionate skeleton into the volume of the present body. Skinning is also a process in animation design whereby a skeleton is assigned a three-dimensional wireframe mesh model. During this step, bones and joints that together form a kinematic structure are bound to a surface to which textures and material properties can then be applied. The marrying of these two components, the skeleton and the surface and the bodies, allows the model to appear and move in the digital space. Yet the mask never fits precisely, shimmering through its torsions and distractions. Communication and intimacy is not established through words, but through oscillating states of being in one's own and another's skin, of becoming almost one, being closer and growing more distant again. Coming closer is experienced not only through reducing spatial distance, but also in recognizing your own movements, gestures, and shapes elsewhere. And I would now show one last video. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
It should be now a video, right?
We can see your slide.
Okay, 1 second.
The Startwerkzeuge image.
Then I need to change here. Now it should be a video.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, perfect. So this was footage from an experiment with an interior virtually placed camera, referring back to the initial small exercises that I was talking you through. And it is footage together with Esther Balfe and myself. And I can, of course, talk also more about this experiment, but I would, for my part now, close so that we still have the chance to maybe have a few moments of conversation, to not go over time too much. But I'm happy to talk more about this particular moment of our rehearsal as well, if that is of interest, of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. This was amazing.
And I apologize for the many actual glitches.
So yeah, thank you, Christina. This is amazing work, and it's really fascinating to take it all in from the beginning. But before I say anything, I just want to let the people participating, if you have any questions, unmute yourself, switch on your camera if you like, and feel free to ask questions first before we then start talking in more detail about it. We can also use the chat, of course. If you want to rather write than speak up. So yeah, now is the time to learn more about this. It must have been such a long process to develop the whole language around it, and the visuals, the concept. So I have loads of questions if no one wants to. Oh, we have someone. Lily.
Yeah, so I thought maybe I would say something at first. First of all, yeah, I find your work fascinating, and I've seen you talk before, and I was so impressed, because I think it's quite rare to have somebody who has such an amazing way of speaking, but also you actually work with this technology and with your body. But yeah, what I find really super interesting is the way that you bring all these different kind of like references together. So to talk about the Aristotelian difference between like potential and actuality, but also, yeah, there are so many sort of technical things that I didn't know before, like this term skinning, for example. I can't believe that is the technical term. But I wondered if you could say a little bit, because what I find super interesting about what you do is the focus on vision, which I think is quite, I mean, I guess to my experience, sort of like a rare thing to come into work that I guess would be described as performative in a way, so that the focus isn't, it's obviously on all the senses, but the way that it translates into vision, and how how this interest came about. But of course it's also kind of like a spectral vision. So I mean, I have so many different things that I want to ask you, so I just thought maybe if you could talk a little bit more, I guess, to make it more specific about the way that you interpret the body, and the way that you kind of conceptualize vision. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for your question. It was actually, I have to say, not a struggle, but it was also always a question why we would actually favor the visual so much, because actually it didn't matter. For the experience of the practice, it was not so relevant, and there was always somehow this unresolved ambition to also share and make this work experienceable for a kind of viewer or a witness. But in a weird way, the work with Esther, or the physical performative work, was not really dependent so much on the visual. So that is one aspect maybe that I can report from from these experiments. On the other hand, what became very important, working with the idea of placing or replacing the eye into your body. I mean, we did, most of the footage you saw were now experiments where the virtual view was placed on that invisible skeleton that made the real-time interaction possible onto our bodies. So it would be moving all of a sudden from your wrist, seeing from your wrist. But we also experimented with placing the view external from your body. So basically what it did really is it slowed us incredibly down, and it made you actually not see. So there is this weird, what is maybe also apparent in a self-portrait, where you actually look at yourself, and in the moment of production you are actually blind, so to say, because you're in between those two fields of sight. So it's also here where there is a very weird almost closing of your eyes. I mean, of course you're moving with a second person, so you have your eyes open, but it's a very different form of attention, maybe more of a peripheral vision than a focused vision. And that had a lot to do with taking your eyes somewhere else and placing them, in your knee, for example, and seeing with your knee and moving with a second person in space, where your shared vision, so to say, is not in your actual eyes, but somewhere else. Yeah, I don't know if that goes in the direction of your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's fascinating the way that it makes a whole different reality that is kind of like, completely virtual or invisible appear. I think it's beautiful work, but I think we have somebody else here.
Hi, my name is Freya. Thank you so much for I'm really sorry I had to rush off, so I missed some of your presentation, but your work really resonates with me. So I'm a glitch artist. I work with performances and basically challenging software, and then from a feminist perspective, because dealing a lot with the language used in software, standard bodies in 3D software, 3D modeling, these kind of things. So I'm really sorry if you already discussed this. So I'm really curious a little bit about the technical element. So I approach the computer as a cooperative entity, and then using glitch and glitch also as a metaphor, but also as a tool. It allows me to become also reflective on my own work, because it opens up this era in the work that otherwise I would not have had in the work. So it allows me indeed to respond to my own work as well. And I was just wondering, how has this practice changed your own practice? And from a technical perspective, were the images reactive to your movement, or is it really just the videos and then you made your choreography? Sorry, God, it's late. In sync with the videos, or was it really, because that's kind of what I'm doing, I'm triggering things, so I'm just curious how that works. So
so thank you, Freya, thank you very much. Exactly. So it is a live real-time interaction framework. So we are really linked together. The figures and our bodies are responding to each other. So it's not a video that we are choreographing to. Quite on the contrary, the motion tracking system is very yes, you can either say unstable or reactive. It depends a bit, and that would be my approach to the error and the glitch, that it is actually a very productive source, whereas the computer engineer that was part of our team was always very frustrating.
It's a bug. No, I need to fix that. You're like, no,
I gotta fix this bug, and oh no, it collapsed again, and latency, and yeah, all of these, so to say, disturbances of a fully functioning system was incredibly interesting to Esther and myself working with those figures, because actually it opened up a space of communication or almost intimacy between those virtual figures and the machinery and the technical apparatus and our own moving in the space. So yeah, that would certainly, in that sense, I think we shared the same approach to.
Is she frozen again?
Yeah,
I think so. Unfortunately, I think it is Christina's connection in the end.
Yeah. Oh, it's a shame.
Yeah, I think she's back. Yeah. Yep.
No, she's doing this intentionally. I mean, it must be, right?
Maybe.
show.
Keeping us on our toes.
Yeah, unfortunately, I thought it was Lisa's connection, but I think it's actually Christina's.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I don't know why it's so such bad luck.
I think it's just
yeah. Certainly not my first Zoom conference, but for some reason I'm suffering here. I don't know why.
No,
I'm very apologies. I'm sorry.
Well, the internet is the that guy here. Maybe I just continue if are there any other questions from people before I go next? No, so I took loads of notes, so I don't even know where to start, but maybe just the most interesting thing that because I saw I could see how your dance practice is coming into this and how this played out with giving us the embodiment first of you closing the eyes and then becoming aware of the body rather than being directed by the gaze, and how important the gaze is actually to feel your body. And I was fascinated. I think it was the first video that you showed where the lines go through the eyes of the man and you're standing in front of him and he's mirroring your movement. And how the position of the neck and the eye, how that he holds his balance and his point of center so directly. And could you see this figure while you were moving, or was this?
Yes, so I'm actually I'm moving that figure. So weirdly, I'm in a way in the body of that old guy, and I'm looking back at myself and looking at myself. So yeah, always the work with the figures is a kind of simultaneous, real-time, so to say, pas de deux or trois, and yeah. So yeah, I don't know now. Where should I comment on the situation, or what are you interested?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you could see this guy, and my really big question is how you got the idea of doing this project, how it started as a practitioner coming to the virtual realm. So what was I guess the body was first, and how did it develop? Maybe you could speak a little bit more about that.
Well, I would probably need to go quite a bit back. So there has been, and it's a collaboration with Wolfgang Ciappella, who is also at the Academy of Fine Arts. He's leading the Art and Architecture Institute here, and we have collaborated on the Austrian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and we did a work that was not live, really. It was a projection of virtual figures that moved on the walls of the Austrian Pavilion, but the visitor basically looked at an animation that was pre-recorded. But we did note over the months that the show was on that there were relationships established between even this non-real-time situation. And so we became very interested in making that into a real life setting, but also keeping that so to say, like quotidian, like making it even more quotidian, or kind of like you would almost stumble into a scenario where there all of a sudden are virtual figures. So without a threshold of putting on a tracking suit or having to hold any kind of I don't know, controller, or putting on a head-mounted display, we were looking to build a space that is without threshold, so to say, allowing me to enter and exit and kind of face the glitches of a relationship with the virtual or with virtual bodies. And because we are somehow originating also in the architectural sphere, we were interested to look back again, which has been throughout the history of architecture, at the human body and how it is constructed and how it is interacting with its environment, and how bodies are interacting, to then somehow speculate about whether what kind of buildings we need, or whether building at all is still relevant, because we are maybe already in a very different sphere. So that was the big overall question or interest initially. And then, of course, once you start to build such a project and a team and bring in all these different disciplines, it becomes, it takes a bit its dynamic also. But that was the initial vantage point. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I think there was another question by Aller. It's more a comment. Shall I read it, or can you read it yourself? She wrote, thank you, Christina. It's interesting how you are creating the figures' movements, but also how they are affecting to your emotion, making it somehow more aware, question mark. They don't feel like camera footage, but alive with character. How did you decide the size and color of the figures?
Yes, thank you, Ala. Well, it was very important for us that the size is at least human, and they were actually a bit larger than human size. And we experimented with different positioning of the screen and the projection, and having it also upright, having multiple screens. But always it was important that that it is really well, it's not an opposite, of course, but that screen, but that because the essence or a big factor or aspect of the work is movement, we had to somehow be in the space with them. And the color is a good question. The gray that I've presented today was one phase, but there were a lot of, they have been more colorful. They had shiny textures at times. So we were playing with different, so to say, aesthetics also of the figures. Somehow though, ending with this gray, almost, kind of pleated texture-like surfaces of the figures, because it somehow was not so in the foreground how they look, but more the movement nuances were important to us.
Right, there was another question by Freya. I just read it out. She asks, she wants to contact you and hopes that is fine.
Of course. I don't know how you can share my email, or should I type it in the chat, or you share my email? I don't know. You're probably a group who is anyways in touch, so I'm happy to if you could share my email.
Maybe you write it in the chat that she has.
Should I?
Away. Yeah, okay. That's good.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I'm here. I'll just.
Yes. Hi.
Your question.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, I had a few questions, if I may.
Sure.
I was just wondering, you were talking about that you were in the beginning in one of those videos, you were looking through the eyes of the man that you saw in front of you. So I'm just really curious how that affects your own movement, because all of a sudden, I mean, yeah, does it change you in a way? And also related to the question about how did you decide about the characters or the figures to use? I saw that he didn't have any specific male genitalia. Was that a conscious choice? Yeah, so those were kind of some questions.
Okay, well, maybe I'll start with the last question. We were very interested to let go of, well, interior and exterior, but also of a fixed figure. So the way we built our figures was actually, they had the exact number of vertices in their mesh. I'm sorry, this is now getting very technical, but so the way they were constructed was identical. And that allowed us to actually blend between all of them. So we had an ensemble of 7 figures, and they all had the exact number of points. And so basically we had an uncounted amount of figures, because with the slider we could go from Bob, the old guy, to the younger woman, Carla, and everything that is in between, so to say. And that's why gender somehow was not really a category, or also the body was built in such a way that that the body, like the limbs and the trunk, were rather rough, and the face and the hands had more articulation. So the eye bulbs we built, the tongue we built, whereas the so to say rest of the body was rather schematic. Okay. And that had also to do with performance issues, because such a high resolution figure in real time is also very heavy. Yeah. So, and that's why we decided for a particular zones in the body that would be more, had more resolution, while others were a bit more maybe general. And
did you feel like it also limited your own movement, because these figures were quite limited then in their movement? I mean, yeah, I'm just really interested in the interaction between.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. You would also maybe assume that because the skeleton we worked with was such a schematic skeleton in relation to a human one, that interaction would be limited also. And it's almost like with the black and white figures, like those children, or, you know, I don't know, like these cutout figures. When you animate them, you get quite, like, for example, yeah, there is a South African artist, Walker, and I can't remember, Karen. She does beautiful work, just black and white, and it's animated. And for me, that is always a great example to show how with like a simple body,
you can still,
the movement is very, very nuanced. And that was, we faced the same effect. So even though the figures were maybe schematic, the way they articulated was very special somehow, and not primitive at all.
Do you mean, Christina, do you mean William Kentridge by any chance?
Sorry?
Do you mean William Kentridge?
William Kentridge, no, that's also a fantastic example. No, but it's a female artist. I think her last name is Walker.
Alice Walker, no?
Walker, I have to.
Karen Walker does this cut out figures, but they aren't
animated. I think aren't they sometimes animated, or maybe now.
I haven't seen animated ones. Maybe.
Yeah. I meant her.
Mm-hmm. I have. Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if I'm muted or not. I have a related question, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I was kind of, also really interested in what you said about kind of, looking through that figure's eyes, and then, having this figure sort of like being situated inside it. And I'm not really sure what the text is, but I have this kind of memory of reading, I think it is Lacan, who basically sort of talks about sort of a mirror image where you have what is reflected in the mirror is no longer present. So you have a kind of like virtual space where you have a figure, but the figure is no longer in the actual space. So the person looking at the mirror is seeing a reflection of something that is no longer there. And he kind of talks about that being the perfect moment of sort of subjectivity, or like the image, or how the subject is kind of constituted. And in a lot of moments in your work, you talk about the otherness in those like spaces in between, in noise. And I feel like there's also kind of like political ethical project in what you do, because you also talked about the importance of, you know, bodies that cannot be fixed, bodies that aren't recognizable. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's very interesting. For me personally, I would say that it's not so much a framing a subjectivity that I could then, or that would engender or emerge out of the practice with being with the figures. Really, on the contrary, that I would be very uncertain what that really is. So even, I mean, the project was running for 2.5 years, and I almost on a daily basis I was entering that space, and we changed it a lot, and those figures also changed over time together with us. But it also came into my quotidian life somehow, changing the way I would dress before going to work with them. And because I knew that certain pullovers that I have would actually produce more glitches in our conversations than others. So they would almost wander, like move from one shelf closer to the foreground. So I really do think that also, in particular, then working with a second body, for example, Esther, made that very apparent, that it's a very complicates subjectivity rather than destining you to one. And because you are somehow in between the other physical body in space and the one on the screen, and all the somehow invisible links that you share, your place is not like, there is no horizon anymore, and an upright body that, or like your orientation in space and with others is really unsettled. And I think that also links very much to that other vision, maybe also your previous question, that it is no longer this, so to say, Vitruvian or Da Vinci man that is spanned into a structure that then fixes a body into a grid or an upright vertical situation, but it's a very fluid, uncertain, upside down, somehow without gravity at times, shared space. And yeah, it really is the technology somehow became a very physical partner in it.
Yes, thank you. And I did want to say actually about the color that I found, the gray, very evocative of the diaphanous that you were talking about. Yeah. It feels very spectral in this way.
Good. Thank you.
Nice. Carry on from that. I was wondering, the human figure that is depicted in also Freya's question, there are no genitals, and it still looks very masculine, and like the head is very big, so, and the shoulders. And I wonder if that was on purpose, first of all. And then the second question I had was what you just said about that he or she, the figure, became very attached to you, and you because you communicated, and this interaction, going back to Karen Barat, that the reconfiguring of figures, so your own subjectivity and his figure. I'm wondering what your perspective afterwards, now looking back at it, do you consider this non-human figure a human figure because it was basically you, but then it wasn't you? So what is your personal interrelationship with intersubjectivity with this figure?
Well, first of all, that's maybe a bit of a coincidence that the male figure was such a dominant one in the footage. There would have been also a lot of footage with very, very diverse range of figures. And we bought, like the figures are 3D online store-bought scans. And they are as they are. So they're real humans. They kind of provided their body to an online 3D scan lab, and you pick them. And then from there, we started to construct the figure and change their bodies a little bit, or make them basically one family, in the sense also that they could blend and merge with each other. So at some point, so to say, at the very end of one figure, they might be very male, but then they have all other versions in them also. Yeah, sorry. And then the second part of your question.
That was how you relate to the figure of this non-human figure,
yes.
this subjectivity.
Well, I would say that it was somehow the figure was not so important. It's weird because all we see is figures, but in the end, it was a carrier of a certain experience, and it could have been something else. It could have been a plant, or maybe even more abstract. I think it became more important for the so to say presentation of it, or the performances, the showings that we did, the reception. But personally, as a movement practice, for me, it was not so important that that is the head of a figure, or that I'm now moving around, or that the knee is a knee. And actually, because we are now continuing the project with a follow-up grant, and we are now getting rid of the human form. Because we wanted that a long time ago, but somehow there was also so much to discover that we remained within that previous interest-based project with the figure. But also the figure somehow had no space, so there's the darkness. So there was no environment really for the figure. We just solely concentrated on that structure. But yes, so now we move away from that concentration and work with other forms.
Yeah, very curious to see these other forms emerge.
Yeah, we are just starting.
Right. So it's 15 past. Are there any more questions? If not, then maybe we draw a close here. Thank you so much for joining us and for letting us look into your eyes and the outside perspective. Very fascinating project. And yeah, best of luck for the non-human continuation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lily and Lisa. It was a very special event. Thank you.